Passing Thoughts of a Firefighter by F.J.Bates. Chapter 6. Hard to Forget. Saturday night in a fire station is always one night that you wish that you were off duty. Perhaps this is because everyone seems to be going somewhere. People are going shopping together, just out for a good time. Very few people are seen walking by the station. By being on duty, my wife Helena is home wishing that I were too. There have been a lot of Saturday nights on duty since this particular Saturday, but this one stands out so vividly. I doubt that I will ever forget it. It was a beautiful day, clouds just drifting by. A hot day, but enjoyable. It started out great. Relatives were up from New London, Connecticut for a few days, staying at my mother's. New London always was my favorite vacation spot when I was a youngster. Perhaps seeing my aunts again brought back those days. Regardless, it was so lovely to have them here. I reported for night duty, and after the routine practice of checking the equipment on the apparatus and the truck itself, the crew headed for the front of the station. Usually a few neighbors would stop in to say hello and wind up in general discussion on about every subject. Still classified as the boot, I would just listen to it all. I would never dare to offer my opinion in these discussions. At 7 p.m., the house phone rang. Engine 1 and ladder 2 to the rear of 311 Derby Street. Probable drowning. The South River flows into an area about 300 feet wide. On one side is situated the electric power station, and at the rear of 311 Derby was a lumber yard, Langmaid's. This yard was accessible if one walked along the stone wall which bordered the murky river. Two youngsters had walked along this wall to the point behind Langmaid's lumber yard. One of the workers at the Peabody Street electric power station was watching the two youngsters, and suddenly, one of them fell into the water. The wall was 3 feet above the water, making it impossible for the youngster to pull himself up. The worker from across the river ran to a telephone, notified fire headquarters. In this time element, possibly 2 minutes, the worker returned and all was quiet. No one around. The murky South River as smooth as glass. Not a ripple from the east wind that was coming in from the ocean. The worker hoped that in some way the youngster had floated a little way downstream where he may have reached land. He did not know if this were so. The other boy had also vanished from the area. The detail arrived at the scene. Acting Deputy Chief Fred Harney Sr. was told about the possibility of the youngster being in the water. The other boy came running when he heard the sirens. With tears running down his cheeks, he stated that his friend fell in. He was 5 years old and lived on Charter Street. A police detail went to the home of the missing boy to make sure he was not there. Simultaneously, the crew stripped to their running pants and started to dive in the river, which was probably 8 feet deep. The plan was to try to cover as much of the immediate area as possible. This was to be accomplished by diving in, surface diving, swimming underwater, hoping to feel the youngster's clothing while doing so. It was next to impossible to see underwater for any distance due to the murky color. Some of the crew followed the wall, hoping to catch the youngster's body floating out. And a large crowd had gathered to watch the operations, and they were kept back by the police. The gates of the lumber company were open for us to enter, so all the people just flocked in. The tide was going out, and it was natural to assume that the boy's body might go out with the tide. With all the diving by the night crew into the water, it seemed hopeless that the boy would be located. Finally, a rowboat was taken from a nearby mooring. Luckily, the oars were in it. The police had a large grappling hook on hand. The orders were for Jim Cohn and myself to take the grappling hook and drag the area. Jim took the oars, and the operation of the hook was my job. I had never operated grappling hooks before, especially under these conditions. The hook is a large triangle, 3 feet wide. On the top, it has a ring for the line that lowers it onto the water and pulls it up. At the bottom, it has a series of 3-prong hooks, or, as some call them, jigger hooks. These are very sharp, and in my nervous condition, one of the hooks pierced my finger. As we started from the shore, Jim was at the oars. And I was at the stern of the boat. Slowly, Jim moved the boat, and I dropped the large triangle of hooks over until it hit bottom and slowly pulled it up. Glancing toward the shore, it seemed that many people were observing us with the anxious face. After covering a distance of perhaps 50 feet straight out toward the other side, I felt something on the line, and I told Jim, "I've caught something." And Jim replied, "Pull it up." I was desperately hoping that I had an old discarded tire on the other end of the line. Leaning out over the stern and pulling the line end of the line, watching into the depths, I prayed that it would not be the youngster. Suddenly, all came into view, a foot or so above the surface of the water. Yes, it was the 5-year-old boy, face up, and his arms were moving as if he were swimming. The hook had caught him at the cuff of his dungarees. As I looked down at the full view of the boy, I thought he was still alive. This was due to the current moving the arms in a clockwise motion. Even the small legs seemed to be kicking. I told Jim that it was the boy. The oars were pulled in, and Jim came to the stern. We both reached out and pulled the boy into the boat. As Jim rowed for shore, I administered artificial respiration to the boy on the floor of the boat. Reaching shore, a resuscitator had already been set up. The operator, Pete Norton. The boy was lifted from the boat, quickly wrapped in a blanket, the mask of the resuscitator put over the little face. The boy was taken to the Salem hospital with oxygen from the resuscitator being applied all the way. Looking at the different firefighters still wet from going overboard, water flowing from their wet hair down over their cheeks, many a tear flowed with it. I know my eyes were filled and a big lump was in my throat. And I would say that all that were there had the same. The youngster was dead on arrival at the hospital.